Lord, yes, papi, hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought up and told to have no fear. I was brought up and told to have no fear. I was brought up and told to have no fear.
Welcome to the Full Circle Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, David Roberts, along with the OG Dr. Neil Holmes. And today, filling in for the oral historian is a member of our Full Circle extended family, Mr. Larry Conway. Our guest today is someone I go way back with, back to 1976, elementary school. We have Mr. Kevin Myles. Kevin, welcome, brother.
Hey, thank you guys for having me.
Hey, man, thank you for joining us. And just to let our listeners and viewers know, Kevin has an extensive career with the NAACP, and which we're going to talk about, and we're going to go into his new venture, or I guess should say new upcoming position with the Southern Poverty Law Center. But I just have to add that I've been trying to get Kevin on with us for a while, and his Wednesdays were always booked because he was the National Training Director for the NAACP. So I guess those Wednesdays he was training, know. So
right.
as soon as he resigned his position, he reached out to me like, Dave, if you still, want me on. I'm like, of course. So man, I want to thank you for that. Definitely. So
all right.
Kevin, why don't we get into how did you first get involved with the NAACP?
Okay, now this is a longer story than you are asking, so please feel free to give me head signals, tug your ear, whatever, if I need to tone it back. But when I left high school, I went into the Army. And at that time, that was right when the invasion in Panama was about to kick off. So here I am, I'm 18 years old, first time really out of Cleveland. First time with a weapon in my hand, and the first time I ever got live ammunition, patrolling up and down the Panama Canal looking for Cuban insurgents. And I had no idea what a Cuban insurgent would look like. I just assumed it would be somebody who looked like me.
Right.
And that triggered a whole series of thoughts that led to an epiphany. How did I end up here in a brown-skinned country with a gun looking for brown-skinned people so I can kill them? And I don't even understand what the fight is about, right?
Right.
So that started me on this path where, I never wanted to find myself in a position again where I was uninformed, but I still had years left on my contract, right? So when I left there, I got stationed over in Italy, and that was right before the first Iraq war kicked off. But by this time, I had been ordering $50 worth of books every paycheck. So I had a little library. I knew more about world conflicts than any 19 or 20-year-old needed to. Right. So when the invasion of Kuwait took off, I was fully aware of all of the previous things that took place with slant drilling, all of the conflicts that led to the invasion. So I decided that, I don't want to participate. So I started writing letters to congressmen and all these people asking for help. And literally, it's a fantastic story. The only person who wrote me back was Minister Louis Farrakhan, who wrote me a handwritten letter.
Wow.
And Minister Farrakhan wrote me and told me to go in and tell that man that you're not doing it. And if you are afraid, write me back and I'll tell him for you. Now, Dave, we grew up in Warrensville. I never thought I was afraid of anything. I had already come out of a war.
Right.
So I'm in my second war. Of course, I'm not afraid until he phrased it that way. And I realized that, why did it make sense for me to write 500 letters to folks around the country who I hadn't met, as opposed to just walking into the office with that one white man and telling him that I wasn't going to do it. And that literally changed the trajectory of my life. So I went in, I told them I wasn't going to do it. And that started a whole list of things. They sent me to Iraq with no weapon. I got a whole litany of stories on that. Fantastic time. Had the time of my life in Iraq. They just absolutely had the time of my life. But all of that said, I decided when I got out of the Army, if I had given 4 years to the country, I needed to give more than that to my own folk.
Right.
So I started looking for opportunities to get involved. And I started with the NAACP. I've held every position you could hold in the NAACP over 25 years or so. From committee chair, I was a branch president, a youth advisor, state political action chair, state president, regional director in a couple different regions, been the national field director, been the national training director, been physically on the ground in 38 states doing activism work. And the one thing that if I die today, I want this in my eulogy. I trained 67,000 activists personally around the country.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Definitely. Now, what year was that when you first got involved in the NAACP? Because when I first became familiar with your work with the NAACP, I think you were already the Wichita, Kansas director.
Yeah, I started as the parliamentarian in Wichita, Kansas in 1997. And then from there, I think I became the president in like 2000. I was the president of the local branch for about 10 years. And then, like I say, the state president. And then I got asked to come on staff by then President Ben Jealous, and been on staff ever since, all the way up until 2 weeks ago.
Oh, okay. We're gonna get into that.
Yeah.
Doc, I see you leaning. You got some you want to ask, don't you?
Well, I had a NAACP question. The thing that kind of got you conscious, I guess, was international issues. But yet the NAACP doesn't have an international committee, at the local level. And I think back to Du Bois and the work that he did when he was in the NAACP, all that international work, the Pan-African Congresses and whatnot. Do you think that's something that the leadership would think about, or has there been any discussion about an international committee, a committee that deals with international issues?
Okay, and that's part of the story that I truncated. Actually, at that time, at various points, we have had like a European conference of the NAACP. We've had some NAACP branches that have been in some different countries. And at that time, when I was in the Army, I actually became familiar with the NAACP after getting invited to come and speak to an NAACP group in Italy. That was a part of the European conference of the NAACP. Now, since then, those conferences, to my knowledge, have not been active at all. However, personally, I've stayed involved in, doing some international efforts as much as I can. In fact, there's a group called Democracy in Color, which is the only national civil rights organization in Australia. I ended up I do some training for them from time to time for Democracy in Color, and ended up getting invited to go to the Caston Center's International Conference, and I was a presenter at the International Conference on Human Rights in Melbourne, and did some work with the Koori people and with immigrant populations into the country of Australia as well. Yeah. So, to answer your question more directly, it's something that I would love to see a more intentional focus on. But the NAACP kind of ebbs and flows based on the membership at that time. I do anticipate at some points those conferences will be stronger than others. Right now, I don't think that they are particularly active, though.
But I'm not talking about just conferences, overseas, but even for chapters here. Having a committee, a standing committee that deals with international issues. I'm an NAACP member, and when we were looking at committee memberships, and I said, hey, you got a international committee that deals with international affairs? They told me no. And I think that would be a great thing at each of our local levels. If we deal with issues like all kinds of issues on the continent of Africa, we deal with things like Haitian immigration. All of those are things I think that could happen.
Yeah, they absolutely could. Like I say, it would take. There's a process internally to kind of get that to bubble up to the policy level.
Mhm.
But definitely it's worthwhile. And, certainly I agree with you, man, because, that's how I came into this work.
Yeah.
If I may, I'm interested in knowing what was the NAACP's position on young Blacks getting killed by police, and on top of the fact that we have an issue with killing each other in the urban areas. It's like you want to fight one fight, but then you have another fight on top of that. What exactly, well, not exactly, give me a roundabout answer. What you say you train many activists. What was your position on activism with that topic, with that issue?
And this is one of the more confusing things for people about the NAACP, and that is how decentralized the leadership structure actually is when it comes to responding to issues. At its best, the organization is hyperlocal, right? You can have some degree of advocacy that comes from the national office, and that's generally what people anticipate and expect. But I live in Atlanta. What they decide in DC or what they decide in Baltimore has very limited import when you get down to Macon, Georgia, or less import when you get to Birmingham, Alabama.
Right.
So what a campaign looks like should be necessarily different based on the complexities in each one of those individual areas. Now, in terms of what I really emphasized in terms of tools for people to be able to go out and deal with this, I got a partner of mine, I'm a name drop him, a brother named Reddit Hudson. Red was, he was a police officer in St. Louis, in the area right around Ferguson. Left the police department, went to the ACLU, left the ACLU, came, worked for us for a while. Now he works in the district attorney's office, and he runs his own organization of Black law enforcement officers, not Noble. This is an organization of Black law enforcement officers to try to encourage more officers to deconstruct the whole blue wall of silence. And what I would do with Red is I had Red do a number of trainings with me and with other activists to talk about, here is how you actually do effective advocacy when it's time for the police department to renegotiate their union contract. You want to change something, you've got to get in there and bust up the language inside of the police union contracts, because that's where they are protected from their dirty deeds. And so I had him do a good number of trainings around that. And also, Reddit is the one who personally trained me on how to investigate police complaints. And so we actually kind of laid that kind of training out to people in terms of, by the time you get the story in the media, everything is going to sound great. It's going to sound like it all makes sense. The guy had a gun, there were witnesses, he reached for his waistband. They'll tell you this terrible phrase. They'll say it was lawful, but it was awful. And, if it had not been for that, we wouldn't have had to do this. But I remember Reddit told me something, and I'm going to share it here because it really turned on a light bulb for me. He said, it's like if somebody tells you a story about a person breaking into your house, and how they came in, they kicked in the door, they came in and they stole all your stuff, but they leave out a detail. Like, he was actually totally naked when he did it, but somehow you left that out. Well, if you leave out a glaring detail like that, there's a reason why you left it out. So the trick is pouring through the narrative to find the holes, the pieces that were left out, like in Sherlock Holmes, where they talk about the dog that didn't bark, and chasing through the story. And I remember we did one, and you all got to stop me if you need to, because I'm a cornucopia of stories.
That's all right.
We were investigating a police shooting down it was somewhere in North Florida. And the young man, apparently he was stopped. There were two other young men in the car with him. They said he jumped out of the car. He had a gun in his waistband. He was reaching for the gun, and then they had to shoot him. And they had statements from the other two young men that corroborated it. So we asked to hear the statements, and actually Reddit was the one. He's like, I want to hear the statements. and they played for us excerpts from the statements, which, you know, the excerpts were damning, but, you know, Red, as a former police officer, brought back that analogy to me. If they cut it for a reason. So we wanted to hear the unexcerpted statements. And when we heard the unexcerpted statements, they disagreed on material facts, like where this gun supposedly was. One of them said that the gun was beside the seat. One of them said that the gun was under the seat. Now, that may not seem like a big deal, but it is a big deal if you are literally sitting next to the person and watching them retrieve it. You know, did he have to stop the car and literally bend all the way over and dig something out from the front of the seat? Or was it like sitting right next to him? And how do y'all not know if both of y'all were right there? And then when they pressed one young man about it, he got confused and like changed the subject. And then the question was, well, okay, if the gun was all the way under the seat and he had to dig it all the way out, why would he bend all the way over to get the gun and then lean all the way back to stick it in his waistband just to get out of the car and try to pull it back out again? If the point was to get the gun, to use it, wouldn't that be a whole lot of contortion? And wouldn't both of them have seen that? You know, how could they have not seen it? And then we got into, okay, well, when was the gun found? And where was the gun found? And they found the gun on the guy's person in the ambulance underneath his body, which, you know, I'm untrained. At the time, I was like, well, okay, this sounds terrible, but they retrieved the weapon. And Reddit brought up the point where, okay, they shot this guy and he laid on the ground for 45 minutes while before he passed away, and he still had the gun on him and they left it on him. And then they picked him up and they put him in the ambulance with the gun. The same gun that the kids who were in the car weren't really sure where it came from. And, you know, but all of that was elucidated from the fact that, you know what, they played us clips. And just because they played those audio clips, that glaring hole meant, okay, you know what, this is a thread. We got to pull it. We got to keep pulling it. We got to keep pulling it. Something is missing. Otherwise, they would not have excerpted these tapes. You know, so that level of detail in terms of training people, in terms, you know, I don't care what the hell they tell. I expect you to tell me a great story. Right. When I show up at the police department, I expect your story to be airtight. Y'all have practiced. You know, everybody got together. You know what the keywords are. You know how to lie, right? My job is to figure out where you lying and find it and pull it out.
Now, Kevin, a couple of things I want to talk about, and I definitely appreciate that story. You were saying cut you off, but it's like, I'm enjoying these stories. Now, when I first, again, became aware of some of the things that you were doing, I remember at one time, I know this is ancient history compared to, you know, a lot of things that you've done, but I just want to see how it worked out. I remember you were attacking, I shouldn't say attacking, but you were criticizing like those local store owners in the hood, for lack of a better term, who were selling these. It was like they would sell a rose on the end of a stem that you could use to smoke crack out of. And that's something everybody knew that's the purpose of it was. Yeah. So who was it? I'm not trying to call anybody out by race, but was it like people in the hood that weren't our folks that were selling this? And how did that campaign turn out?
Yeah, and in fact, I have tried to replicate that campaign in a number of different communities. And for all of your listeners, I want y'all to think about it. If you have a gas station in your community, the kind with the big thick glass in front of the cash register, I would be willing to bet you $10 to a donut that they sell some random items behind that thick glass, and you have no idea what those items, why they would sell them, how they chose them, you know, or what they're doing back there. But they are designed to be impulse buys for people who have addictions. Find one of those stores with the big thick glass in front of the register, and they probably sell individual Brillo pads. And you might You can look at it a million times. And if it's not relevant to you, you can look at it and not even see it and never even ask yourself the question of why would they sell individual Brillo pads behind the register at one of these gas stations. And the little rose things, they were like roses in a little box. They came in a little vase. And they were supposed to be little cheap gifts that you can buy and give away to people. But you know, if you weren't a drug user and you weren't an addict, you didn't know what it was. But if you were an addict, you knew exactly what it was, and it was an impulse buy that was set up there for you. Because when you bought it, you take the rose, you throw it away. There's a little label on the vase, you peel that off, and it was a hole in the vase. And it was actually used as a pipe. The Brillo pads are the filters. You know, for people who, you know, are out on the street, you get a little individual Brillo pad, you cut it, and you use that as a filter. I had folks who had addictions who had to come in and school me on this is what they are selling. And they're putting it right in plain view, you know, and if I want to, you know, they say, if I want to stop using drugs, they make it almost impossible because I can't even walk in the store without all of this stuff being right in my face, right? So we went in and, you know, I was young and hot-headed, so I went in and just demanded, take it all out. You know, this is wrong, you shouldn't be doing this. I learned so much during this campaign too. All this stuff I tried to teach people later. So, you know, I remember when I first went in and demanded that they remove all the stuff, they kicked me out the gas station and locked the door. You know, which I considered at the time a minor victory because I shut down the gas station in the middle of the day. But when I kept pushing and I kept pushing, you know, I tried to do a boycott, the national office shut that down. So then I was like, okay, you know, I started asking, I stumbled at the time onto the right question. The right question is, if it's illegal to own drug paraphernalia, then how is it legal for people to bring it into our community and sell it? That was the right question. I stumbled onto it. So I went through all of the law, and what I found in Kansas was there was a little tiny piece of the law that said in the definition of what drug paraphernalia was, and the definition of drug paraphernalia, part of the definition was you had to have the material and the intent to use it to consume drugs. So if you weren't planning on smoking the pipe, it wasn't a crack pipe. It wasn't a crack pipe until I sold it to somebody. And when I sold it to somebody who was going to use it, I could bring it in by the truckload and put it right in the middle of your community. And it was totally legal for me to have it. But as soon as you bought it, you broke the law, right? Mm-hmm. So then I figured, okay, well, if it was that subtle, maybe I could propose a change in the law that would be so subtle that people would barely even know that the change was going through. So I did. You know, I drafted it myself on my own computer, reached out to Senator Oletha Faust-Goudreau, got her to introduce the change in the language, which changed the definition of drug paraphernalia and took out the intent clause. Once the intent clause was removed, it was illegal for the store owners to own drug paraphernalia, the same as it had been illegal for people in the community to own it. So I went back to the same, as a matter of fact, I got the newspaper article. I went back to the same gas station and told the guy he needed to take all of that shit out of the gas station, right? Which he refused, and I called the police. And I had to tell the police what was in the statute. I had to go through the statute with him, but he ended up getting arrested for having more than 1,000 pieces of drug paraphernalia within 1,000 feet of a school.
Wow.
You know, which ended up shutting all of that down. We got it removed from all of the gas stations statewide, all throughout Kansas. All of that stuff came out. So I've been trying, you know, when I was at the NAACP, I tried to replicate that in as many communities as I could.
Now that sounds like a great victory. And Doc and Larry, if y'all want to jump in and ask a question, I don't want to dominate, but I got so many questions here. I'm just curious as to why the national office tried to shut you down.
The national office does not, I mean, you got to be very careful. They exercise a great deal of caution when it comes to boycotts. Mm-hmm. And the reason why, and I do understand it. Number one, boycotts feel like the right answer a lot of times, but they are very hard to sustain over time. not only are they very hard to sustain, it is very easy for our opponents to use a boycott to attack us, not necessarily the store. Let's say I'm boycotting this store right here. What has happened in a number of instances is the other businesses in the immediate area would then file lawsuits against whoever was doing the boycott, saying that you were hurting their business. And those can be astronomical, and it's a way that they can try to bankrupt organizations who do that level of advocacy. So there's ways around it, but at the time I didn't know any ways around it. I just wanted to, you know, boycott this gas station. I'm actually glad that they forced me to refocus, because in forcing me to kind of refocus, like I say, I stumbled upon the right answer. And that led to a whole series of epiphanies on how I dealt with the law and activism, and then how I train people to deal with the law when it comes to activism. You know, one of the things that really bothers me is you can walk into almost any state capitol and you'll see on any given day, the lobbyists pretty much outnumber the legislators, but go around and try to count how many of us have actual lobby shields. You know, and there are very few of us who play the game at that level. And we almost think that these legislators are, you know, coming up with these bills and they're writing laws, and they don't even read this shit half the time. Mm-hmm. They don't even know what's in those bills. The lobbyists tell them what's in these bills. The lobbyists go in and explain what positions they should take. There's a whole lot of power in that. And once I learned that, you know, I got to the point where I started, well, hell, I'll draft my own stuff, you know? I met the person who was in the office of the reviser of statutes, you know, worked with them. I figured out, okay, here's what they're looking for when they're revising the statute. I could write a bill that I knew would fly through the office of the reviser. All I had to do was shop it and find somebody who would introduce it. So I was introducing bills on all kinds of stuff, man. You know, and that's a power that all of us have, but we don't all realize it.
Right.
With that history, you know, all that history of NAACP, what attracted you to Southern Poverty Law Center? What's their mission, and what about their mission attracted you?
This and this is very issue specific. I believe that the fight over CRT and education is an existential threat to Black people. Mm-hmm. So much so that I was willing to leave my position at the NAACP to take a role at the Southern Poverty Law Center, specifically to work this issue. You know, I'm going to the Learning for Justice team of Southern Poverty, where, you know, they've got a great staff. I should start saying we. My official start date is the 21st, but we've got a great staff who's developed all sorts of curriculum pieces, wonderful stuff, right? But there's a missing element in terms of how do you take those wonderful curriculum pieces that you put together and actually get school districts to introduce them. There's an advocacy piece and an organizing piece, and it's a muscle that the Southern Poverty Law Center did not have, you know, sufficiently to be able to make that happen. So that's where I come in. You know, I've spent my whole adult life. I know how to do anything. You know, I got 3,000 people to walk 1,000 miles with me from Selma to DC. If I can get 3,000 people to walk 1,000 miles, I can get people to go to a school board meeting. Okay. Right. So that is because of the threat, because of how serious an issue I think it is, because it's not really about CRT. Right. You know, CRT is just the catch-all phrase that they are using to rally their troops around, while they do some truly heinous and dangerous stuff that's going to affect us long term. You know, if you go into the school and you say, okay, you are not allowed to teach students about systemic racism. You're not even allowed to have that discussion, right? We are not allowed to talk about diversity or equity or inclusion. Those are not values that we want children to understand. We're not allowed to teach anything dealing with social and emotional learning, because we don't even want the children to have the tools to learn from each other. Right? What happens with the next generation? I got 2 grandchildren. What happens when the next generation is unable to fight for their rights because they don't understand why they should? You know, when you literally start going in and stripping out the context with which they would come to understand the circumstances in which they find themselves. And like I say, to me, there are a number of battles that we got to fight. None greater in my personal purview than that. So much so that when I was met with an opportunity to spend all of my time focusing on that, I took that.
So you'll be developing a ground game, so to speak, for critical, you know, to fight against this so-called banned critical race theory.
Yep.
Thing. Okay, good. Good.
That's my role.
Good.
I'm sorry, Dr. Holmes, were you done?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. What other challenges do you feel as though you're going to face besides the obvious, the battle that you said that you have to fight? What other challenges do you feel as though you're going to face with this new position? Going into these schools and, you know, trying to get the curriculum in order, you know, to be, you know, for us to learn more and for us to understand different things like the law and our history and things like that. What other challenges do you think you're going to face? I know with a new position, you have a game plan. And
Right.
I just want to know, like, you don't have to tell me your game plan because, you know, y'all put it in effect, but I just want to know what other challenges you think you're going to face with this new position?
You know, one of the biggest challenges is this process of decontextualizing the struggle. For us, it's not just starting, they're accelerating it.
Yeah.
But it didn't just start. There are a lot of us, right? I mean, my daughter is 30, my son is 25, you know, and this is not putting them down because my children are brilliant, but I feel like they know less about the world than I knew when I was their age. We probably knew less about the world than our parents did when we were their age, you know? That process of going in and removing elements, you know, like a lot of schools don't have civics. You know, I can talk about, you know, going in and how you change a law, but that's, you know, I might as well be speaking Latin to a lot of people in our community, right? Because we never learned it, right? So even having the conversation about why this is important and the steps that we need to take to make sure that we can stop this from happening or stop that from happening. Some of it involves selling that concept to our own people who may not understand it. Right? That's the tricky part. And you know, and that was, thankfully, you know, I got the background from doing all this stuff with the NAACP. So I know what it's like to go into a community that, you know what, y'all are catching hell, but you're not fighting back because you don't realize why you should. And another piece of it is, you know, we have become so resilient that, you know, it's a blessing and a curse. And the curse is we pride ourselves on our ability to survive things that we ought to be fighting. You know, there's shit that we could win some of these battles, right? You can win this fight. You know, I tell people, I don't care where you live, add your school board budget to your county commission budget and add that to your city council budget. If you are in a moderate sized city, you are probably looking at about $1 billion in public money. Then ask yourself, how many of those dollars go to Black contractors and Black businesses? And I would be willing to bet, regardless of where you live, if you got more than 2 or 3%, I will be shocked, right? $1 billion floating around. And, you know, and I'm trying not to get too passionate, but this is my soapbox. I tell everybody, I've been paying taxes for my whole adult life, just like everybody else. I am 52 years old. I have paid as many dollars in taxes as any 52-year-old white man in the country, right? I don't want to hear about your kids got nothing that my kids don't have. No, I don't want to get together in a Black church and talk about how I'm gonna go build my own school. I paid for this school. I paid for the school your kids go to. If your kids got a science lab, then damn it, my kids need to have a science lab. You know, that's not me begging shit, I paid for it, same as you did. You don't get to take my money. and then not give me what I paid for. You don't get to use my money to finance your kids' education. I don't want to have to drive to the other side of the community to go to the good mall because my mall is raggedy and my streets are torn up. Shit, I paid for the asphalt. I paid for the motor graders. I paid for everything that was used to beautify that other community. I paid just as much as they did. Right? Getting our people to understand that, you know what, this is not about negotiating or begging or none of that. This is about saying, look, I'm invested. I paid for this. And you know, and you don't get to punk me. We tough when it comes to each other, right? I ain't gonna let somebody who looked like me punk me. But just like when Farrakhan asked me, why wouldn't I go in there and tell that man I wasn't gonna do it? That's the question we gotta ask ourselves about why you ain't down at the city council meeting. Why you mad at Jesse Jackson about the condition of your street? He ain't tear it up.
I'm shaking my head continuously because I'm feeling what you're telling me, because as a child myself in my school system, I didn't learn a lot about Black history from the 2nd grade on until I got to Cheney University, where professors like Dr. Neil Holmes taught me about the coups in Africa and things like that, where I had conversations with Andre Taylor about the different subject matters that we think about that we don't learn about. You know, everything you're saying is so point on that we need to learn these things, and they're not teaching it, but they'll put other subjects, and I don't have to say which ones, in place or in school to teach them this new life. You know, not teaching us where we came from and things like that. And I hate to say it, Dr. Holmes, I didn't know what a coup meant until you taught me in college. You know, I knew what a coup was, but I didn't understand why there were Blacks in England and why there were Blacks in Scotland until I was with Dr. Holmes. And I don't consider myself a stupid guy. I was kind of self-taught. My mom gave me a book called Black Boy when I was a kid, things like that. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. But that's, you know, that's general stuff, you know. And the thing that you're going to fight is detrimental for us to know, because from my experience, these are things I learned later on in life and not early on in life, you know?
I mean, like, people don't even know there was a literal coup, a successful coup in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Yeah.
You know, they impaled Black men's heads up and down the street and named it Nigger Head Road in Wilmington, North Carolina. Right? How is that not taught outside of the city of Wilmington?
Exactly. And even being in Philadelphia and learning how the city is built on racism, you know, literally the streets, everything is built on racism. I'm just learning this. So as you're talking, it's like, wow, somebody gets it. Somebody understands. Not to say nobody never understood before, but this stand that you're taking and this position that you're taking, we need this, you know?
And that's the danger, right? Because if you say by fiat, we are not allowed to discuss systemic racism, then children are left to interpret their social condition and make up a rationale for it. Maybe it's because we're not smart. Maybe this is good enough. Maybe, you know, maybe they did work harder than we did, right? You literally go in and say, you know what? It is illegal to tell y'all the truth. That is, in my purview, from my vantage point, that is the most dangerous condition that we are facing right now. That is the long game, right? That is the way that they are trying to make sure that there is no future Black Lives Matter movement, by taking away all of the building blocks that these kids would use to be able to create one.
You know,
right? So, and like I say, hell, I could fight. You know, I've been doing this for a long time. I am an exquisite fighter. So, you know.
You know, one time we had some brothers when I was an undergrad at Akron, they used to come down and speak. And I remember something that they would always say, that said true power was to define your sense of reality and have other people accept it as their own. And so my son, my 15-year-old son, actually, you know, he edits these podcasts for me. And sometimes he'll look at some of the things I'm talking about. And one day he asked me, like, why do you have to make everything about race? You know, it's like, And I'm not saying in any of these podcasts, I'm not saying go out and kill anybody, anything crazy. I'm just talking about, like you said, critical race theory and, things that are going on in the country, but he's been conditioned because he's growing up in his school is a lot more diverse than mine, ours was, so he's just been conditioned to, kumbaya, peace, love, and that's fine. Maybe that's some progress, but I don't want him to ever get to the point where he doesn't understand these concepts,
And the thing is, and this is the rough part, right? Because all of us who get to the point where, we can do this level of advocacy and start speaking out, right?
Mm-hmm.
That requires a certain degree of privilege, right? Just to be able to think abstractly. And not have to deal with day-to-day struggles on how you're going to feed yourself. But the truth is, the majority of Black people, the majority of us are not upper middle class. The majority of us are struggling, right? And like one of the issues that has been plaguing me, if I was standing in front of 10,000 people right now, 10,000 Black folks, and I asked them how many of y'all are renting rather than owning your house, I guarantee you more than half of the hands would go up, right? Because the majority of us rent. Almost 60% of us are renting. Of that group, just about everybody just got a rent increase, right? And you probably didn't get a raise that corresponded to your rent increase. So if you are just an ordinary Black family here in Atlanta, the median income is like $34,500, which you can't really live on, $34,500, but that's the median for Black folks here, right? And you struggling, trying to figure out how you're gonna deal with an extra $400 a month in bills now that your rent has gone up. That's a Maslow level challenge, right? You don't have the ability to sit around and think abstractly when you got to make sure you making sure, that your ends are meeting and that you don't run out of month before you run out of money, right? Who's supposed to take that up? Who's supposed to deal with that? And the problem is those people who are dealing with those Maslow level challenges, they're not going to be at the meeting to speak up for themselves. So their issues oftentimes get ignored and get kind of pushed to the back burner because they're not at the meeting, right? They're not at the university. They ain't fighting for student loan forgiveness because most of them ain't got student loan, right? That's the reality if you actually look at the numbers, right? But somebody has got to have that damn fight. And sadly, that's what I'm saying, the whole process of decontextualizing the struggle it's a progression. Our own kids, don't really understand the struggle at that level, right? I remember my kids when they were younger, they kind of get it now because they've heard it their whole lives, but my kids thought I was like a dinosaur. I'm like this dude always talking about race, and why am I always talking about race? But the subdivision I live in, and I will tell you, I'm very proud of this. I live in the Blackest city in America, literally the Blackest city in America. We just incorporated 4 years ago, the city of South Fulton, south of the airport in Atlanta. We are 92% Black, right? But here in my little enclave, in my subdivision, we've had 5 or 6 families who've had to move out because they were renting their houses, right? And if you live in Atlanta and you want to move someplace else and you want to rent, you got to have 3 times, you got to make 3 times the rent in order to qualify to move in, right? So remember I said, median income here is like $34,500.
Right.
But the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in Atlanta is about $2,000 a month. So if you need $54,000 to move into a 2-bedroom apartment and the median income is about $34,500, if you have to move out because you can't afford the rent increase, you probably got to leave the city, right? Nobody's having those levels of discussions. And then when you juxtapose at another level and you think about the fact that Atlanta is only about 52 or 53% Black, what's the impact of Black people who are mostly struggling, right? Who are disproportionately impacted by what's going on with housing and the numbers of Black people who are gonna have to move out of the city and move further south, right? What does that mean 5 years from now, 10 years from now, to the political leadership in a place like Atlanta that we still like to call the Black Mecca.
Yeah,
Right.
but that's the move all over the country. Black folks moving out of Chicago, moving out of Charlotte, North Carolina,
They're taking it.
Moving out to the suburbs, and at the same time, the suburbers, the greatest growth from poverty are in the suburbs. So that's part of the move. But here's the political question I have, because you're talking really about fascism on the rise in this country when you talk about burning books and armed private militias and that sort of thing, and stealing votes and really gaming the system against Black folks and other people. When you look at stuff like primaries out in California now, and you look at which way the vote is going, in addition to kind of that issues-based organizing, like around critical race theory and that, the larger framework in terms of the voting and how it's shaped up, how do you see that moving, and what's the strategy for dealing with it?
And this is where I am not well aligned with a lot of our organizational leadership in the Black community, but that don't mean I'm wrong, right? In fact, I know I'm right. It's just gonna take a minute before everybody else gets there. But public policy, I've seen a whole bunch of memes now where people talk about we need policy change. We need, public policy is a reflection of the culture that produces it. It is not the other way around. The war of ideas is where we are getting our asses handed to us because we are not participating, right? When those brothers came up to the school, David, they were absolutely right, because there is no greater power than the power to define things.
Right.
That is absolutely the greatest power. 5 years ago, folks would Black folks walk around talking about being woke. We had t-shirts, God is woke. That was the new term to replace consciousness. It was this whole effort that, we're gonna celebrate this idea of being informed. And they came along, co-opted the term, turned it into a pejorative, and got us scared to say it.
Yeah.
Right.
And we don't have another term to replace it with.
Right.
Right? It was a movement around this whole idea of being woke. That was a thing that we wanted to aspire to until they came along and said, oh yeah, being woke, that's a bad thing. And now we, everybody, we just quiet. We don't say it. We ain't got another term.
Propaganda.
So if we just chase the policy aspects of it, it's like playing whack-a-mole, right? And the big boogeyman in the room, and this is the part that's at the heart of this whole CRT fight, is it's only one battle. It's just white supremacy. That's it. That's the only fight. It has been the fight, but we can't fight it if we can't say it. And a lot of us, we're scared to even say the word out loud.
But now, when in my generation, I was from the kind of like the Black Power movement, and we had, our notion was that really white folks who are progressive in their thinking should really be going into like small towns and little places and organizing and promoting, that discussion that you're talking about, that consciousness. But a lot of them are afraid because they're coming from those small towns and little places, and they come into our community for protection, and yet want to lead it. What do you think about that notion that we really need to get a good group of white folks? I mean, white folks that are really, I never liked that term woke really myself, but just a generation thing probably. But we've got to get, it's just continuation from that 60s, 70s thing. You need to work your community, and you need to, because I remember in this 70s, 80s when they had the recessions.
Mhm.
And the plan was coming into little towns like I was in Ohio, then in like Middletown and all those places, and saying really telling white workers that the reason you're losing your job is because they're giving all this stuff to black folks.
Mhm.
And there were not a lot of white folks in those same towns fighting that kind of idea.
But see, I think the difficulty is we all participate in the gentleman's agreement not to really tell the truth about how bad things are.
Mm-hmm.
And some of our white allies, they know what's going on in some of them same white communities.
Yeah.
Right. And they know it's that how bad it actually is does not necessarily get depicted on television. There's something y'all can look these videos up, because these videos are all on YouTube. After Mike Brown got killed, we were in Ferguson, myself, Cornell Brooks, who was the president of the NAACP at the time, and Carmen Watkins.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in his hotel room watching on television when the district attorney came out and said that they were not going to charge the officer. And then the folks ran down the street and started setting fires. So I had this idea at the time. We need to go to Mike Brown's house, and we're going to march from Mike Brown's house to the governor's mansion, right? It's 130 something miles, take us about a week. And the goal was the governor, who had like fled the state and was preaching law and order and this, that, and the other, and wasn't listening to the protesters, black folks out there burning stuff up, and the police out there acting a fool. My thought was, if we could direct the anger, right, we could possibly keep somebody else from getting shot in the interim and build up enough momentum so that when we get to the governor's mansion, the governor has to come back and physically talk to these black folks from the community in Ferguson about what needs to happen. So we start putting together a route, and I wanted to go through little tiny white communities,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which we were advised by law enforcement and everybody else not to do none of that. But the only way to really show why Mike Brown got killed and why he got away with it, in my view, was we're gonna walk through these communities. And if y'all really these law-abiding people and Mike Brown was the monster, then we shouldn't have no problem at all. We should be able to walk right on through. We should be just fine. And there's a video, if you look up NAACP Rosebud, Missouri. When we got to Rosebud, Missouri, and I'll make a long story short, we were met by 300 or 400 white folks out in the middle of the street. We had a little support bus behind us. They surrounded the support bus. That's the first time I ever saw the Klan in real life, not some dark shadowy figures out in the woods at night, but like in the middle of the day.
Right.
They had put 40-ounce bottles and fried chicken bones and shit like that out in the street. They had lynched a deer from a tree. They shot the bus. Like while we standing there, they shot the window out of the bus. It was hellish. It was like something out of a civil rights movie. But this just took place when Mike Brown got killed.
Right.
But it was so bad that the governor literally returned back to Jefferson City that night and sent word that he wanted me and Cornell to come and meet with him privately. And sure enough, by the time we got to Jeff City, we had 750, 800 people with us. And he actually had to come back and meet with all them and put the task force together, and we got some laws changed and all that kind of stuff. But all of that to say, the difficulty is all of those folks who were talking that, anti-Mike Brown and this, they knew what was going on in them little communities. That's why when we said we were walking through there was no shortage of people who were trying to make sure that we knew we wouldn't be safe.
Right.
Y'all knew we wouldn't be safe because y'all know the communities that you came from.
Right.
Right? That's the difficult part. But I'm religious man. I'm one of them folks who believe there ain't no path forward if we ain't honest. We just start there. Let's just tell the truth. And that don't necessarily get us to the finish line, but shit, it get us started.
Right. Now, Kevin, why don't tell us, now you already talked to us about what you plan to do with the Southern Poverty Law Center. What's the first phase of it, I guess, or has that been put together yet? You got to get in and start.
No, I got to get in. I got to get in. I will say, you know, on a separate note, I have my own organization, and this is just a small organization. It's me and Minister Mark Thompson, who from the Make It Plain podcast does a lot of stuff on MSNBC, and Coach Kidada Ismara Gray. And we are just setting out to do our own advocacy stuff, you know, really kind of focusing around education and around housing, rental controls, and police accountability. But in terms of the work that I'll be doing with Southern Poverty, I got to physically get in there, and day one is the 21st.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Well, man, we definitely wish you well, you know, with them. I'm sure you're going to have the same level of success there that you've had, you know, with the NAACP. And I'm hoping that, you know, after you've been there a couple of months, you can come back on, you know, when we can catch up with you and just see how things are going.
That works for me.
Hey, again, man, like I said at the outset, definitely appreciate you for coming on, reaching out. It's great to catch up with you. And hopefully we have you back, I'd say in like, what, 3 months maybe?
That works for me.
Hey, appreciate you, brother.
All right. Y'all take care, Doc.
All right, you too.
Lord, yes, papi. Hit me one time and make it funky.
I was brought up and told to have no